welcome to the M Word. We are very privileged indeed to have the delightful Rebecca join me today. She is going to talk about one of the most sensitive subjects I've ever known in my career, talking about fabricating induced illness. And this is something that's really personal to Rebecca. Couldn't have asked for a better person, because not only has she experienced being subjected to this delightful not label, she actually volunteered and said, I'm more than happy to come and talk about it. So Rebecca, thank you so much.
Because apparently if you're referred to social services, you are supposed to, through the policy of the school, have a meeting beforehand to talk about it, and there was no meeting. And we'd actually invited her to that meeting, and they fabricated the supposed meeting, saying that we refused to have the meeting, which we didn't. And we put that in writing, and that was actually in writing, and she knew about that. And she, the lady from Families First, she put that basically she wanted to know why there wasn't a meeting. So we actually had that. We've got that in writing. That's one of the fabricated things that the school's actually done. Yeah, that's only one.
So before we kind of go into the next little bit, let's kind of just explore what was going on for the whole family at that point, because you've said a couple of times that you'll talk about your son in a bit. So let's bring him in and let's think about the other family members. What was going on at that point for everybody?
Well, obviously it was causing a horrendous amount of stress. My daughter was incredibly well. My son had been experiencing for probably about 2.5 years, no, probably 3 years, horrendous bullying, online and in person, which had actually started in the school that my daughter was in.
Right.
And with the deputy head that I'd spoken about, that made that comment when we came in, he was actually in his class for a year. He'd had continual bullying that was just horrendous, and it would kind of flare up every 2-3 weeks.
Right.
And that was kind of manipulating friends, kind of not letting him access the actual room itself. He would body block him. He would do anything possible to basically make his life hell. My son had lots of friends online. He would actually enter via other friends, piggyback through other groups, through friends. He would also do things like on the Facebook page, they had like a group chat page, and he would put horrendous things about my son, and they would invite the whole class to join in. It was continual, and then basically it culminated on a school trip. This was in the last year of his primary school, where my son was actually physically assaulted 3 times. And we complained about it. He came back in, we complained about it. And the teacher sat him down with, this was the deputy head, who, funny enough, was safeguarding lead as well.
Huh.
Oh, yeah. He sat him down with 3 of the other bullies, and we believe actually that this is, well, we know that this is where all of the trauma originally starts from. And because the bully had, now do bear in mind, we'd had Teens in Crisis to try and support my son to have, he'd actually come into the school to do counselling with my son. So it wasn't like a case of, there was a couple of instances, literally this was probably about 2 times a week. So he'd actually had professional counselling to try and, deal with the trauma. And so he had the bully there, 3 or 4 other bullies that sat with him who supported him, who were actually obviously terrified of him, probably because he was a really, really big chap. And they all denied that this had happened, and the teacher believed him. And my son was sat there, had to listen to this. And then the teacher called my son a liar. And that then went on for the next sort of month or so. Oh, and he also called me a liar as well and said that I was making it up. That also went for the next couple of about 4 weeks, until the end of term. So if anything happened in the class, he would basically say that he was lying. And it was horrendous, absolutely horrendous. And my son, I remember my son actually going to school after this had happened, and he was sitting in the car, he was making noises like an animal whimpering and just hysterical. He was so terrified about going back into there. And I would say to him, right, okay. I said, you have to, I said, he's feeding off your terror. And I said, you have to go back in and just pretend nothing is, it's not affecting you, which he did. But obviously it caused major trauma. And this actually carried on, even though my son was sent to a different secondary school, because they did have some friends in common. He would ring my son incessantly. He would, I went to the police. They didn't really do anything about it. And also after that, we found out as well that the teacher that basically we've been complaining about, the safeguarding leader, was actually best friends with his parents.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on with your son. What about other family members for you, your partners, were there any other siblings?
We've got a younger child, who is a couple of years younger. Thank goodness, a lot of that he was very
oblivious
to most of it. But obviously, my partner, he works for the post office, he was a manager. Coming up to the pandemic, it was a horrendously stressful time. Trying to look after everybody at work. And we were both really terrified about what was going on. Just to let you know as well, with my son, he was also physically threatened, that basically the bully, and he used to instill other children to threaten him, and we had threats that he was going to come to our house to slit my son's throat. And social services did nothing about this.
So did you report this matter to the police and social services?
Yeah.
So by now then, what we've got is a situation where we've got hospital being aware of you by name.
Yeah.
Schools obviously being aware of you.
Yeah.
The police being aware of you.
Yeah.
And then obviously social services. So by now there's an awful lot. And let's not forget the first support for families.
Yeah.
That's five
yeah.
different types of professionals involved, with your household aware that there are difficulties. And I know it must have felt absolutely horrendous, because it didn't matter which way you turned to try and get support, it felt like there was very little being done.
Yeah.
How did you kind of deal with that as parents? Did you find that you were both, I mean, it was a very stressful time. We've got to remember this is sort of like COVID time as well.
Yeah, it was
added to this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, it was terrifying, because we didn't know. So my daughter was convinced she was going to die.
Yeah.
And actually it was interesting because the fitting got worse. And I actually rang our practice and explained what was going on. And the doctor I spoke to said, but if she's fitting this much, that's life-threatening.
Yeah.
Now, we'll talk about gaslighting, what the paediatrician did to gaslight us. We found out later that she'd run every professional that she could to discredit us.
Now, why would somebody do that when quite clearly with medical training you are taught that, epileptic seizures are not healthy for the body? Right. In fact, to the extent that you're trained to time them, to monitor how bad they are, as to what damage that can potentially do to the brain. So I'm very intrigued as to why she felt so obligated to ring around when you cannot hide the fact that a child was fitting. I'm kind of intrigued as to why that would happen. So did you get any reasons back
No,
as to why?
no.
And what was the responses
Well,
then for all the people
we
she rung?
well, we only found out because basically it came out at the child protection meeting.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And in the documentation that we didn't really have time to read. So kind of between there and so anyway, we were allocated a social worker.
Right.
The social worker came with the lady from Families First, who we knew very well. I will tell you that the lady from Families First thought she was she thought she was incredibly unprofessional.
Right.
And did not agree with the things that she was asking or the line that she was taking. And she told us that. And I think she did everything possible to try and, not to say, hang on a sec, I think things are not right. We'd explained what had happened and that, we were very concerned about our daughter and we needed support.
Yeah.
And that was it as well. We had lost a baby, so we'd lost a baby probably about a couple of years before that, and we dealt with it at the time. And we'd been very open with school and just said we haven't told the children because it was quite early on. It was probably about 3 months in. But obviously we were very upset at that time. And if in any way you can see that it's affecting the children, they don't know, but you don't know because we're upset. Please, can you let us know? The school also said that to the social worker. So they also told them about that, which the social worker then brought up. We were like, oh. So yeah, it was very much aimed at myself.
Yeah.
And I said, obviously, I'm very, very worried about Sophie. I'm very, this is happening, that is happening. The social worker, it was obvious that she was checking all her medical facts with the consultant that we were making
complaint about.
Yeah. So everything basically, she was going, oh, it's down to anxiety, and obviously pushing it back towards us.
So at any point were you able to challenge the social worker and say, where did you get your information from? And is it not possible to go? And were you able to ask for another opinion?
No, we weren't allowed. In fact, do you know what she actually said to us? Well, she said to me, she said, because we challenged this. Now, if anybody is experiencing FII, I seriously do suggest this, is that in the end, thank goodness, we were put onto this by a friend of ours, to a professional body who basically had independent social workers and who are advocates. And she basically said, you need an advocate because there were things that were being fabricated about us. So, for example, my daughter actually to the social worker, that was it. The social worker actually said to me that under any circumstance, now this included if she went and broke her leg, I was not allowed to take her to the doctors, to any doctors.
Why? Why would you not? Surely now hang on a minute, because then the other way around, if you didn't take your child to the doctor, you would then be accused of actually not showing due care and attention.
Yeah, absolutely. So it didn't matter what happened. It was a complete. If you did something, if you went one way, you would be chastised. You went the other way, you would be chastised. So it didn't matter what you did, it was wrong. And at that point, Sophia was horrendously suffering. So basically, at school, she was having fits of blindness, which I didn't even know about. They must have been seeing her fitting. The school were fabricating things against us, so they would send. They actually asked us to bring her in a bit later, so that was at the when it was quiet. So because she was vomiting so much in the mornings, so I would bring her in when everybody else had assembly. So that was only sort of like 9:10. I think it was 9:05, 9:10 every day. And so she could sort of settle down and just be quiet for 2 minutes, and I could say to a teacher if there was anything that had happened. Unbeknown to us, obviously this was all being recorded, and they would daily question her. So this is the teacher that I told you about, the deputy head who was safeguarding lead with her teacher. They would daily question her about what she'd had to eat. They were trying to go down the we're not feeding her properly, even though she had lost no weight. And my daughter, she doesn't look, in no way, shape, or form does she look starved. And she hadn't lost any weight whatsoever. Because one day she basically said to them that she hadn't really eaten anything that evening because she felt unwell and sick. No, actually, she'd probably been. I lived with my father at the time. My elderly father was staying with us, and she used to go in here and just kind of, have crisps and snacky stuff. So she would have eaten something. She just hadn't had a main meal, which is very unusual for her. Mm. So they brought that up and basically said that we weren't feeding her. No, it was just hilarious. To which actually the lady from Family Square said, "Well, that's rubbish. I've seen Sophia, go and have what she wants, or ask you if she can, is there whatever." And you said to her, "Yeah." That was absolutely rubbish. They said that we kept saying to her, "Well, sorry, going back to the attendance."
Yeah.
So they asked her to bring us in. They would send her home because she was so unwell at certain periods, and we think that basically she was fitting. It wasn't written down, but we think she was fitting. We know it was recorded that basically that she had a period basically where she lost her eyesight and she went blind and she was terrified. And they actually, in the actual child protection meeting, they ridiculed this. They basically said that there were no symptoms seen. And the symptoms, when we actually looked at the SAR report afterwards, because we asked for a SAR report, in the SAR report, we counted over 30. Now, that would probably be only about 6-8 weeks before there was lockdown. 6-8 weeks. There were 30 plus, there might even be 40 separate instances where she has reported symptoms of post-concussion syndrome, or separate ones.
So what I'm really hearing is there are lots of incidences where things have been almost not quite dismissed, but they've been certainly played down.
Yeah.
A lot of incidents have been played down. But there's also a new emerging theme, isn't there? There's very much about the social worker suggesting that you are under no obligation, absolutely not. You are not to take Sophia to the doctor. And there is that new theme coming through that somehow you're being more so targeted than perhaps your partner.
Yeah.
Which is quite interesting, isn't it? Because there is that rather worrying trend about women being seen as, very neurotic, very dramatic, to the point of actually this suggestion that something's really not right. So at any point, did anybody suggest that actually you were doing emotional harm to Sophia?
Yeah.
At what point was this? Was it sort of 3 months in? Was it 6 months in? At what point?
Probably, I would say, so when she was discharged, I would probably say kind of at that point things really did start changing, and it made, well, definitely when the social worker said you are not allowed to take oh, that was it, she actually said if you take her we are going to remove your children. She threatened us.
That's just staggering, isn't it?
Yeah, she threatened us.
So,
Yeah,
so I'm still reeling from all of this information, because it's actually, you've had a child who's gone from one consultant who's identified as a specialist, something's really not right, and in the best interest of Sophia has referred on to pediatrician, and that's where things really have gone really dark, because you've been unfortunate that you haven't met a specialist pediatrician. But not only that, a pediatrician is very keen to stress that this is all about anxiety, but not able to identify anxiety from what. And because of not being able to identify anxiety from what, it was felt that there was nothing wrong, therefore she should go back to school. And all along, if the A&E consultant had known about this, there probably would have been further repercussions that would have supported Sophia as being at home. But because there wasn't, we've gone down through this pathway that has led to now involving teachers who believe that actually there is nothing wrong and therefore she needs to come into school. But even though they are still having incidences which they are playing down, because a consultant pediatrician has insisted this is all anxiety, and we know that schools don't support mental health particularly well. So at this point, you are now being told you can't take Sophia for any support, and that you are now actually presumably an emotional risk to Sophia. Was that extended to your son as well and your other child?
In the child protection meeting, yes.
So now we've got a woman, a mum, who's being deemed at risk to her own children, despite years before where that has not been the case. In fact, you haven't even flown on anybody's radar, but because of one accident, that Sophia inadvertently caused herself. And again, I can relate to this because my own daughter absolutely hated school at the time. We didn't know she was autistic, but we certainly knew she was dyslexic. Somehow got her foot trapped in the duvet and fell on her arm.
Oh my gosh.
And cried out, and I looked at the arm because she said, we've joked about it afterwards, Mummy, I just knew, you'd said to me, it doesn't matter what happens, you still have to go to school. And then of course I look at an arm that clearly is hanging incorrectly, and it's like, we won't be going to school, we're going to A&E. But my point being is, look at the two incidences. We've had our daughters, we've had to take them to the A&E because we've had concerns. And, for my daughter, it was a relatively straightforward job. It was a case of, right, we'll put the arm back in cast. But when you can't see the brain, it is very, very difficult. You can only see the outward symptoms. And the outward symptoms, you've quite clearly stated several times over: vomiting, nausea, blindness, temporary paralysis, the building of the skin to where it's been stretched and is so painful. So there is clearly lots of issues surrounding that incident. If somebody had suggested that you had caused the accident, I would absolutely get all of this, but unfortunately you were the one who took her to A&E.
That was never ever
it seems so extreme, doesn't it? It seems so extreme to what has played out, doesn't it?
Well, it does. And you just sit there thinking, why would we ask for help with my son? Why would we do, let's face it, why would I have even bothered taking it to A&E? It's like, oh, really? It was almost, if it wasn't so horrendous, it would have almost been laughable. In fact, actually, my my son's counsellor said to me, if it didn't come from your mouth, I would have said it was like a soap opera on
Yes.
EastEnders.
Yes. Yes.
Because if I didn't know you, I would think that it would be, you know, some sort of drama,
Yeah.
because it was just so horrendous. And I mean, it went on. So it's
Yeah.
at school. So I've had to put up with, as I said, daily questioning. She had the TAs and member of staff routinely laugh at her condition when she said that she felt ill, had double vision. They kept saying to her, "Oh, you need to get your eyes tested." We even had a teacher put the word concussion on the board, and the whole class had to spell it for a week. And if you can't, I mean, you can dismiss a lot of things for being bullying, but if
Yeah.
you can't tell me that that isn't staff bullying. That was, I mean, it was just absolutely horrendous. She was also denied to go to the toilet. Um, yeah, it was. Oh, and we had another instance as well where that particular TA that I'd spoken about, Sophie had been vomiting in the morning, and I made her teacher aware, and she was she was forced to sit down and eat a bowl of cereal even though she said she didn't want it, and she was not allowed to leave until she'd eaten it. And she said, "I don't want it." She said, "You have to have it." Oh, and there were other instances as well where um, we had repeatedly asked if she could, so for example, at the end of a line, if she could go to the end of the line, because her balance was so dreadful, she kept falling over when, you know, everybody was moving all together. That was completely ignored. Other instances as well where she had two further head injuries, which is really, really serious.
Mm.
In school, where she went up and basically hit her head on a locker, and unfortunately the TA in question was her the first aid person, and they didn't check on her at all. She was having double vision. She was feeling like she was going to pass out. When we looked at the SAR report, because we wanted to know, they didn't do anything. They just literally made us stay to the end of the day, and said, and literally in the report that the first aid of this TA, it said that she was in the car, the TA was in the corridor at the time, and because the TA didn't see it, it didn't happen.
Yeah, yeah.
And yet on the SAR report, it actually says that Sophia had reported to the teacher, because it was the teacher writing the report, that she'd hit her head and was feeling unwell. And then it says on there 20 minutes later, she said she had double vision, and she completely ignored her.
This sounds absolutely horrendous. We want to do this justice, don't we, Rebecca? Because we feel this is such a big issue. And I know that, you know, we have got so much more of this story to uncover, haven't we? So I know we've agreed previously that we will come back and do another episode, because there is far more meat to this story, is there not? There is so much more that we need to understand. But what we've got is obviously what has happened as the initial event, but through going through the right people and then the wrong people, and then being supported by more wrong people, what we've got is this escalation of how a mum can be accused of fabricating induced illness. So we're going to take a pause, and obviously we will then go on to the next sort of bit of the story, as it were. And if it takes 2 or 3 sessions, I'm absolutely fine with that. I hope you are too. But because I think so many people will find this invaluable. So we're going to say goodbye now, but obviously Rebecca and I will be back for the next episode to learn a bit more about how the FII became quite a serious instance and how that impacted you and your family, because obviously there were considerable impact. There was a considerable impact with it. Thank you so much again for being so lovely and agreeing to kind of do this. But I know this is a cause that's very forefront of your, we have to do this. It's so important to raise this awareness. So I'm very grateful to you indeed. And my thanks obviously to everybody who's been kind enough to watch and take an interest in learning a bit more about FII. And obviously you're very welcome to watch the next episode where Rebecca will be telling us even more interesting information that perhaps might be able to help other parents be signposted as to what they need to consider. I'll leave you with this thought. The biggest thing that struck me so far is, why would anybody suggest that a parent would want to do this level of harm? We'll come back and discuss that for sure next time, because that just doesn't make any sense, does it? Any sense at all?